Welcome to Career Tools. This week, Asking Smarter Questions, Part 1. The questions this cast answers are: what are smart questions? How can you ask smarter questions? And what questions can you use?
Many of the folks who follow our guidance rave about how actionable the guidance is. The podcasts are not where the action stops, however. Join us at one of our upcoming public conference events, and you'll leave with a full-on game plan for the next 10 months of your managerial life. Looking for the answers for both the what and how of successful management? Visit us at manager-tools.com/training and register for an upcoming event today.
Kate, you and I are in lots of meetings, and sometimes there's somebody really smart, really clever, really intellectually able who asks a question and you think, how did you even come up with that? Why? How? And then other times you ask a question, often it's me, I ask a question, then I get the answer and I'm like, well, duh, of course that was the answer. What a stupid question. So in order to help me and everyone else, we're going to do a couple of casts, probably this is quite long, about asking smarter questions. And if you're British, that's not well-dressed questions, that's clever questions. And we have quite a long outline because we're going to break it down by question. So we have lots of examples.
Great. So our outline today includes ask questions: what, why, when, how, where, and who. Okay, so the first topic we're going to cover, it's kind of funny to say that because it's all about questions, but our first bit is ask questions, right? It's always better to ask a question than not. And if you're going to take an action and you're not sure where it's the right action, then you should ask. If you're drawing conclusions and you're not clear on one of the variables, then also you should ask. When people say there are no bad questions, this is what they mean. They mean that asking the right questions, or even just the question you have, reduces our uncertainties and helps to solidify the truth and the right path instead of making assumptions that could lead us astray. So we do want to ask those questions. And questions honestly do have various degrees of smartness to them. In our guidance, when we talk about don't drop dimes, we discuss not outing your colleagues' mistakes to your boss or your team, or, not catching them off guard with those things. For example, when someone is presenting progress on their project, don't draw attention to the fact that they're behind schedule by saying, oh, you're behind schedule. What are you going to do about that? Unless they're your boss or you're their boss.
That happened on a call I was on recently. Somebody said there was a target, for a numerical target that somebody was trying to reach, and then somebody else said, you're way off your target. Are you worried about that?
Oh, gosh.
No, you should not have said that in public.
That's not helpful. Right. Unless you're their boss, that question isn't smart. As a peer, instead we could ask if they need help, because maybe we can assist, maybe we can provide some extra helping hands, but do that before or after the meeting. Maybe honestly before, if you're thinking about it. Or you can make statements about tasks. Something like, I see you're having trouble getting an answer from legal. I know that's helping one of your tasks to get done. I know a few people over there and some people owe me some favors. Do you want me to help out? If I could call in a favor, would that be helpful? We could say that instead of pointing out that people are behind or kind of calling them out on their tasks and lateness, because that's not fun for anybody, is it?
It's not cool. In the rest of the guidance, we're going to give you a pointer on smart questions using Rudyard Kipling's poem, I Keep 6 Honest Serving Men, as a framework. So if you have a license, you can read the poem at the end of the show notes. But basically, the poem is about asking questions, really. He says, I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. I send them over land and sea. I send them east and west. But after they have worked for me, I give them all a rest. So he's just talking about how you learn things, and the way you learn things is to ask questions, and questions conveniently fall into these 6 sections, which all have question words at the beginning. So we are going to start in order with what?
Right. What is the deliverable? This one comes first because it's the question that makes such a huge difference and is so rarely asked.
So we're going to say the word that begins the question, and then we're going to give you a couple of examples of questions that you can use, which are smart questions, which begin with that word. So we're going to start with questions that begin with what, and one question you can use, one really good question you can use is, what is the deliverable?
And keep in mind, guys, we're giving you this guidance. We don't need to ask all these questions every time, right? Just as a caveat, because we might already have some of that information. So we ask them, like, of the team, if we don't have that information. If you ask all these questions when a bunch of the information's in the email or the presentation, that's not helpful. So we start with, what is the deliverable, based on the assumption that maybe it's not clear. And this is our first question because it makes such a huge difference and it's rarely asked. A deliverable is an action, a person, a deadline, and a report. So something like, by 5 p.m. Friday, Susan will send out the meeting agenda and text me to tell me that it's been sent. That's a deliverable.
So the action is sending out the meeting agenda. The person is Susan. The deadline is 5 p.m. Friday. And the report is, text me to tell me when it's done.
Yes. We so often hear something in meetings like, we need an agenda, and then everyone moves on. When no one has been allocated the task, the action, experience tells us that no one will do it. If no one's assigned, no one will do it. That makes sense. And if there isn't a deadline, our experience says that the task will never get done either. So we want to be clear about the task and who, the deadline, and the reporting. And we talk more about this in our guidance about fixing deliverables, right? We have a cast called The Effective Manager Value Chain, Fixing Deliverables.
And we said there that deliverables have to be given to one person, not a team or we, because you know this. If your boss is in a meeting with his team and he says, we need to do something, nobody does it because they all assume that somebody else is the we that's mentioned. So one person, because sometimes Mark says it's one-necked choke, which is not nice, but it does mean, if it's been allocated, then that person is then responsible. Deliverables have to include the reporting of the task as well as the task, because how many times have you asked someone if something's been done and they've been like, oh yeah, I did that 3 days ago, and you didn't know and you were waiting on it, or you didn't know and you were worrying about it. And the shorter the deadlines, the more likely it is that you'll get delivery of the thing. So we also all know that most of us, when we were in college, we would get a deadline, write this essay and it's due in a month. And when did you start it? About 3 days before the end of the month. And that's just human nature. It's true for all of us. It's true for us in college, and it's true for us once we go to work. So if you set a small amount of work and a closer deadline, then it's more likely to get done. So if you had to write an essay, the first thing you have to do is decide on the title. So maybe you say, okay, my deadline is by the end of tomorrow, by 5 p.m. tomorrow, I am going to have written the title or decided on my title. And then a day later, the outline and so on. You just break it up into very small pieces and very short deadlines because it's just way easier to get done when you do it that way.
Absolutely. Deadlines drive behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we also want to make sure that we keep in mind that the key to getting work started, and not just at the start, but in any phase of any work where we're talking about ideas and ways of doing things before we actually decide what actions to take, the key to getting started is to assign small deliverables with short deadlines early on. We increase our urgency that way. And not measuring pretty assertively the start of the actions phase is essentially tantamount to accepting a near complete delay of the first steps of work until you ask for the status or meet again on the topic. If we're not measuring those things that we've assigned early on, because everyone's busy, it could get lost, right? The topic is really important now, but your directs are going to go back to their desk and their work, and they get swallowed up with everything that's in front of them, as we all do with those things that are right, like assigned quickly, they're behind, right? It's understandable, but those immediate deadlines and other work allow them to set aside that undeadlined, unclear, undeliverable work that you just talked about. And it just causes us not to get started. So if you did nothing else but make sure every action you thought about or was mentioned in the meeting around you was a deliverable, your productivity would increase by 100%. So it's a pretty quick way to do that.
Yes, very easily. So the next what question is, what does that number represent? So if you've done any studying around accountancy, you'll know that on a balance sheet, 2 and 2 does not equal 4. I was so shocked about this when I started studying accountancy in college. It's like 2 and 2 is 4, right? Well, no, not if you're an accountant. For example, if your firm buys a large item, such as a car, the value of the car has to be on the balance sheet as an asset because the company could sell it and recoup the money. That's the definition of an asset. But you know from your own purchases that the value of cars can be different, right? There's the value you paid for it and the value you could actually sell it for. There's the value that the loan is saying it still has. There's the value that you might get out of it as a trade-in. No, it's not as concrete as I paid 20,000, it's still worth 20,000. And so as an accountant, you can choose to list the car on your assets around the value you paid for it or the value you could sell it for. And there's tax benefits of doing it either way. And a lot of what accountants do is work out the best way to show something on a balance sheet to benefit the people that own the company. And so if you see a balance sheet and there's a car listed on it, a vehicle of some kind, and next to it a value for it, under the assets is a value, you need to know, is that the value we paid for it? Or is that the value we could sell it at? Or is that some other value? Because depreciation, which is showing the decline of value in an item on accountancy documents, depreciation can be done all at once. The moment you buy the car, you can say, okay, in 5 years, it's going to be worth 5,000 and that's what we're putting on the balance sheet. Or you can do a little bit each year, or you can do it all at the end. And again, there's benefits. But if you're looking at the balance sheet and you're trying to work out what things does this company have of value that it could sell, then you have to know what that number actually represents.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that it could be. And if you don't know, you might make the wrong decision or assessment. We need to know what that means.
There are generally accepted accounting principles called GAAP, and there's international accounting standards that tell you how to account for different things. But they don't apply to everyone. Small companies, large companies, international companies have different rules. And even when they do apply, there's wiggle room, according to the accountants I know.
Yeah. Knowing what the number represents is critical. Is it gross, right? Gross income is pre-tax net sales minus the cost of sales. Or net, which refers to the amount remaining after certain adjustments have been made for debts, deductions, or expenses. Do sales account for potential customer returns? Are you comparing apples to apples? For example, if you're looking at employee costs around the world, are you taking into account the different number of vacation days they get? Things like that. There's subtleties. We need to know what those numbers represent in order to make the right decisions. So those are some examples of the what questions. What's the deadline? What does the number represent?
Yeah. So next we'll do why questions. And the biggest why question is 5 whys, which is the name of a technique. So 5 as in the number 5 and then whys. And it's a technique for establishing the root cause of an event. Mm-hmm. So basically, to use this technique, you just ask why. So you just really inhabit your 3-year-old self and keep asking why. So every time you get an answer to your question, you ask why of that question. So, for example, if your problem is that there are too many bugs in the code that you're writing, then why is that? Well, maybe the developers are working too fast, and so they're making mistakes. Okay, so why would that be? Maybe there's an unrealistic deadline. Okay, why is the deadline unrealistic? Because the customer demanded it and we said yes. Or more accurately, sales said yes, and now we have to deliver it. This is what programmers always say. Okay, why did we agree? Why did sales agree? Well, sales could have agreed just because it met their bonus. That happens. But also it could be that the company is cash strapped and we needed cash quickly. And why do we need cash? Well, maybe because we don't have enough customers paying for our services. So when you get down to it, it's not a coding problem. It's not a problem with the bugs in the code. It's really a sales problem. So that's the power of 5 whys, because the most obvious solution to a problem, or the most obvious answer, often isn't the answer. And the answer actually lies in a different part of the organization altogether.
Mm-hmm. We have some other guidance on this topic, and we have a kind of famous example of the 5 whys that's maybe helpful, right? In 1989, the National Park Service commissioned a study on erosion of the Jefferson and Lincoln memorials, and the memorials were showing signs of damage. The consultants published their report in which they said that increasingly toxic effects of nature, things like acid rain, seepage, and air pollution, were the cause, and that there were some pretty serious structural problems. And so when a 50-foot block of marble fell off the Jefferson Memorial, the Park Service were forced to take action. One of the things that was listed among the toxic effects of nature were some man-made effects as well. And one that could be immediately affected was the cleaning of the memorials. When they compared the cleaning cycle of these specific monuments, they found that these monuments were cleaned more often. And every time the water that they were using hit the buildings, it seeped into these tiny cracks, and it caused the cracks to widen over time because the weather was causing the buildings to expand and contract. So the Park Service asked the cleaners why, and they said it was because there were black deposits on the memorials, and they weren't finding these anywhere else. And it turned out that the deposits were midges' eggs. Midges came from the river, and they were attracted by the lights from the memorial at dusk. When they were mating, they deposited their eggs in the memorials. And of course, this caused spiders, because that's a delicious meal for a spider. And then the spiders brought birds who like to have a delicious meal of spiders. And now we've gotten to a place, right, where many of the reports said that it was bird waste that caused the problem. But actually, it was the midges who were accompanied by spiders and birds. The Park Service had a solution to deterring the midges at dusk, right? They had to find that solution as opposed to birds or spiders. And they decided to light the memorials an hour later so they could have fewer midges. And actually, it did work. And it also upset some photographers. So the lighting was restored to normal.
It's such a sad end to that story.
I know. It's so funny.
So frustrating.
It is. And for us, the lesson here is that if the Park Service had not continued to ask why and tried to get to the root cause, then they would never have found that specific issue that was causing the problem, right? They could have stopped somewhere else. They could have thought, well, we can stop here because we've stopped the spiders or we've stopped the birds.
Well, they could have said, it's acid rain. There's nothing we can do about that.
Right. Well, and they still have the problem, which is a bummer, but asking why can help to get us to the root cause of an issue. So that's our first one, the 5 whys. And then we're going to talk about why are we doing that?
So in theory, there are only 2 reasons for doing things in businesses. Either increases revenue or reduces cost. If you think about anything you do in a business, even if you think, oh, we're going to do something to improve customer satisfaction brings more customers, brings sales, brings money. So that's increasing revenue. So it's a bit like the theory that every human emotion is either love or fear based. And it's true. The things we do in companies either increase revenue or reduce cost. But there are lots of variations and there are lots of nuances to that. And they're not always clear. For example, in the emotion example, is grief, sadness when someone dies, is that love or fear? Is it the missing of the person I love, or is it the fear that I'm going to die too, right?
Right.
I don't know. Some psychologists, I'm sure, can tell us. But in the same way, you may have to follow some kind of logic train to work out why something is being done in a business, because the revenue might be quite far from the actual action.
Yes. You get one cause and effect, and then that kind of rolls on and on and on. And then you get to something else, right? So, for example, a website security patch prevents the website from being hacked, which presents costs and loss of sales and reduces costs and protects revenue. That's an example of why we would patch the website, right? A security patch.
Right. Well, why would you spend money on having one of your engineers patching the security of the website, right? Because, it doesn't matter if it's done or not. Probably not. Are you going to be hacked? Maybe not. But the end result is if you invest that money in doing the patch, then eventually, hopefully you'll prevent loss later on.
Mm-hmm. Another example would be we want to create a new benefit for customers, which increases sales and increases revenue.
If you can reduce the time required to execute a certain action for staff, then you decrease cost. So one example I see a lot is month end. At the end of a month, accounting has to do a bunch of tying up numbers in order to be able to say how much money the company made in that month. And it can take 3, 4, 5, 10 days until the business gets the number. If you don't want it to take 10 days, you can do two things. One, you can put more people on it. So if you put 5 people on it, maybe it reduces to 2 days. And so you've got the benefit of knowing earlier what the financial position of the company is. But it's cost you more because 5 people is more than however many you had. Or you can make the process faster, perhaps by investing in different software. And then your 2 people can do it in 2 days. And so you've reduced cost, because you get the number when you want it in 2 days, but it doesn't take the 5 people. So the more times you can reduce the time taken to do something, that means one person can do more things and therefore reduce cost in the overall company. If you can't follow a logic train to either increase revenue or reduce cost, then ask the question, why are we doing this?
The next question is, do we need to do that at all? There are some more nuanced why questions, and do we need to do that at all is one of them. When we started having training conferences, like when Manager for Tools first started, Maggie or Wendy would fly out to be with Mark and sometimes Mike to cover logistics and make sure that Mark had everything that he needed during the day and talk to the hotel if necessary. And at some stage, we asked ourselves, do we really need to do that? And we decided to try a few conferences where Mark didn't have help. And nothing blew up, which meant that we could reduce our costs significantly by not flying another person in and losing those days of work. And so we continued that way. And we only send one presenter, one person to the conferences now. And so that's a good example of, do we really need to do that? Sometimes our assumptions lead us to actions that we'll discover are not necessary. Or other times, we've actually decided that, yeah, we do need to do that, even if it does increase costs. And sometimes we discover, if we're looking at the root cause, if we're looking for the answer, we discover something that we do need to do. And so asking the question, do we need to do that at all? And then, hey, can we conduct an experiment without it, is a great way to reduce our costs significantly, and something we can focus on to help streamline things, I guess, is the best way to think of it. That's how I think of it.
It's often things that are to do with customers, because in order to understand what a customer is doing and what you need to do to help them, you kind of have to put yourself in their mindset. And that's quite hard to do. And most of us aren't very good at doing it. So I could say, I think all of the packages that we send out should be tied with a red bow because it makes the customers happy and that makes them come back to us. But really, would the customers notice if there wasn't a red bow? Maybe not. So it would be worth sending out some packages without one and seeing what happened. There's a famous American Airlines, I can't remember how much money. I think they saved $40,000. That doesn't sound like much. Maybe it was $400,000 by removing one olive from the drinks on the airplane. And do the customers notice whether there's 2 olives or 1 olive in their drink? Probably not. And yet it saves them a lot of money. So do we need to do that at all is a really good question.
If you've not already, we'd encourage you to register for an account on the Manager Tools website. It's completely free and will give us the ability to speak to you directly about what matters most to you. You'll be signing up for our weekly newsletters and bi-weekly conference announcements, and we'll be on the list to receive notifications about upcoming events in your area. We don't want to overwhelm you with tons of uninteresting information, so help us target our reach out to what matters most to you.
That's all for this week. We'll finish up next week.